lots of people, including some people I know. I would say the most ultimate hits, most ultimate rock hits, of course they're in minor. Because how could you be a successful musician if you're not totally depressed? This is minor, and this is major. So what would you think that when I come Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur before Ribono Shel Olam, and I say I'm sorry, it shouldn't be in major, it should be in minor. Shalom, but God knows this is what it should be like. But for some reason, some of us come before Ribono Shel Olam, and we say, I'm sorry, I did this wrong in major. But what's going on over here? Do you know how special it is that I know that when I come before the judge, I take one look, I open my heart, and when I see who's the judge who's judging me, how could I not daven and pray and sing it in major? When I realize it's my Father in heaven, He's the one. So instead of saying Ashanu B'Gadnuvo, I come before Ribono Shel Olam Yom Kippur, and I say, ay, 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 oh, ay, ay, oh, I did this wrong, and that wrong, but I know that you're giving me a new neshama, new soul. So I'd like to teach you and sing with you in honor of a new year, in honor of major. Let's go. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
And we'll play that Nigun tomorrow at the top of the show. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? I could not cut that off. Wasn't this so beautiful? Shlomo Katz explaining why when we stand before the Ribono Shel Olam, the master of the universe, on Yom Kippur to apologize for all our transgressions, why are we singing that in a major key? Because we know our Father in heaven loves us and will accept our atonement. How's everybody doing? It's great to be with you. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us on Wednesday? Shabbos is coming soon. Renee in Indiana, Stephen in New Hampshire, Stephen in Oklahoma, Nancy in North Carolina, Hannah in New York, Bella in Florida, Paul in Minneapolis, Jose in Miami Lakes, Shandora in the Bronx, David in South Bend, Yehudit. And I'm so glad you're here, Yehudit. You're today's sponsor. James in Indianapolis, Paula in Chicago, Lucy in Minnesota, Karen in Northern California, John in Sedona, Pauline in Arkansas, Paul in the Great Northwest, Melissa in Great Neck, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Guy in Ohio, John in Maine, Helena in Finland. Always great to see you, Helena. Rebecca in LA, and I think you mentioned... My phone died last night, but I heard it this morning. Thank you for the wonderful dedication for my sister of blessed memory. May her memory always be for a blessing. And I was just going to say, good news here in LA, they caught the murderer. Thank God they caught the murderer of that poor girl. You know, had such a promising, bright future, was working, like sort of an adjunct to her architecture degree as a design consultant in a furniture store. And this maniac came in and killed her. At least they caught him, thank God. Patrice in Utah, over there on the YouTube side. Aoife in Florida, Lynn in North Texas, Jeannie in Valley Village. Welcome, everybody. Today's episode of AT Daily, sponsored by Yehudit Sobel, in memory of Moshe Avigdor ben Meir HaKohen. He was a Cohen. May our learning today accrue to the merit of Moshe Avigdor and take him even higher in the world of souls. And Yehudit, may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. And we say Amen. And thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people with your donation. All right, we are in Tractate Moed Katan, the 12th volume of the Talmud. These are the laws of the intermediate days of the festivals. We're on page 7, working our way through chapter 1. Today, completing Mishnah number 3 and opening Mishnah number 4. It's actually a short daf, so I felt that I had the liberty to just let Shlomo Katz's amazing song play a little longer. Let's get into it. We're talking about the kinds of work that it is permissible to do on the intermediate days of the festival because it benefits the public, like marking graves, like removing diverse kinds of seeds or plantlings that are growing together where they shouldn't be. And yesterday we started to talk at the end of the day, what about trapping animals, right? The fact that you can irrigate a field as long as it's going to prevent significant loss and then it doesn't require excessive work, excessive exertion. Well, you're a farmer. What if you've got a rodent problem, some kind of moles or mice or some other kind of rodent that is a threat to your crop? Can you do something about it on the intermediate days of the festival? Sounds like, we got the principle, it should work. If not, addressing the rodent problem is going to cause a significant loss, and taking care of the rodent problem isn't going to require an excessive amount of work, we should be able to do it, and that's what it seems to be. But we have to make sure that it is required work, that this work is needed, even though it's easy. If it's not to avoid a significant loss, we're not going to do it. All right, we picked this up at the top of 7a. We learned in the Mishnah that Rabbi Yehuda says, in an orchard, one may trap moles and mice in his usual manner. But in a field of grain, he may trap them only in a way that is not his usual manner. And what we're learning here right away is a distinction they're making between grain and fruit trees. These rodents pose a problem to orchards and vineyards, much less of a problem to a grain field. These particular pests are not threatening to a grain field. And so if you want to address it for a grain field, they're going to let you do it, but not in your usual manner so you show that you acknowledge that it's preferable not to do any work. If there's somewhat of a reason to do work, okay, but I'm going to do it in an unusual manner. Just like on Shabbos, a hammer, for example, is muktzah, right? So you don't touch a hammer, because what is a hammer for? It's for doing constructive work, and you can't do that kind of work on Shabbos. So you shouldn't touch a hammer at all. That's what muktzah means. It's set aside from use during Shabbos. But let's say somebody left a hammer sitting on the dining table. That's unpleasant. It detracts from the joy and beauty of Shabbos. So, and somebody's plate needs to go on that table, right? We need that spot. We need the hammer to be taken away because it's unbecoming of Shabbos, and because we need its place where it is on the table. But it's muktzah, so what do? Instead of picking up the hammer in the normal way, as if we didn't know that we shouldn't be touching the hammer, we pick it up with a shinui, like the back of the hand, an unusual manner, right? Like the hammer could be sitting on the table like that. Instead of going like this, I might do something like this with my thumb and pinky, or with my left hand. I pick it up in some kind of an awkward manner to remind myself, and in case anybody else is looking, that we all know that we're not supposed to be handling a hammer on Shabbos, but we need its place, so we're going to move it in some kind of a way that reminds us not to, suddenly forget that we're not supposed to be touching it and go off and hammer a nail that happened to be protruding from the wall. So likewise, if you have rodents that are threatening a grain field where they don't really threaten it, you just like to get rid of them, it's not that important, they're going to let you do something about it, but not in your usual manner. And how does one trap moles or mice? In the usual manner. So he digs a hole in the ground and he hangs a trap in it. And how does one trap in a way that is not in the usual manner? He inserts a spit into the ground where the rodents are suspected of hiding. He strikes it with a spade and he removes the earth from beneath it until he finds and kills the rodents. And I'm like, the first way seems like a lot less work than the second way, but that's what it says. So it is taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, when they said that one may trap moles and mice in a field of grain on the intermediate days of a festival, only in a way that is not his usual manner, they spoke only with regard to a field of grain that is adjacent to the city, where the damage is limited to that field and is not extensive. But in a field of grain that is adjacent to an orchard, where they could really become a problem, they're in the field of grain now, but they might keep moving through and get to the orchard where they could do some real damage. In a field of grain that is adjacent to an orchard, one may trap even in his usual manner, lest the moles and mice leave the field of grain and destroy the trees in the adjacent orchard. It is taught in the Mishna, and one may seal a breach in the wall of his garden on the intermediate days of a festival. Is fixing a breach in the wall directly related to growing crops? No. It's related. You might be keeping out rodents or deer or something like that, some animal that's going to come in and munch on your crops. So it's protecting the crops, but it's a little bit indirect, and that's why they're going to be a little bit more lenient with it. Also, it's protecting against a loss, right? So this is the kind of thing that we're talking about. But what's the other side of the argument? Fixing a wall, I mean, especially in the ancient world, stone walls, right? Literally stone walls. So fixing a breach in the wall, that's going to involve, hauling big rocks and cementing them into place. That starts to feel like construction. And construction is prohibited during the intermediate days of the festival. So let's see what they say. And one may seal a breach in the wall of his garden on the intermediate days of the festival. The Gemara asks, how does one seal such a breach? And Rav Yosef said, with palm branches, hutzah, and the branches of a bay tree, daphna, which do not create a significant partition, but simply a temporary barrier. We're not going to get involved in a big construction project. We're just going to do a temporary sealing of the breach to keep the animals out. Next week, when the festival is over, then we'll bring out the wheelbarrows and the mortar and the bricks, etc. It was taught in a baraisa, one fills in the breach with stone, but he does not plaster the stones with clay. So this is different than what Rav Yosef said. Rav Yosef said, just use palm branches, very temporary. This other opinion in the baraisa says, you can actually move stones into place, but you can't finalize this little construction project. You don't cement them into place. You just fill up the hole in the wall with stones. Rav Chisda said, they taught that he may seal a breach but not build a wall in his usual manner, only with regard to the wall of a garden, as no significant loss will be suffered if he delays building until after the festival. However, with regard to the wall of a courtyard, which prevents the entry of strangers who are likely to come in and steal from the homeowner, there he may build a wall even in his usual manner and even on the intermediate days of the festival, right? So now when we're talking about home security, right, like if you've got a front door hanging open or a side gate hanging open, this is dangerous, especially these days, rising crime, etc. So even though we don't get involved in construction projects on the intermediate days of the festival, facing such a critical security problem, go ahead, fix it, do whatever kind of construction you need. The Gemara suggests, let us say that the following baraisa supports Rav Chisda's statement with regard to a wall that is leaning toward the public domain and is likely to fall. A leaning wall, major public hazard. One may demolish and rebuild this wall, right? If the wall is leaning into the sidewalk, like you have to actually come in, demolish the whole wall and rebuild it. Can we do that on the intermediate days of the festival? Normally not. We don't want to get involved in demolishing and rebuilding a big construction project, but it's threatening the public and passers-by. One may demolish and rebuild it in his usual manner on the intermediate days due to the danger that it poses to passers-by. And the Gemara rejects this opinion. There, the reason is, as the Baraisa explicitly teaches, i.e., it is due to the danger that the wall poses to passers-by, and not due to the protection that it affords the courtyard. So, immediate threat to people walking by on the sidewalk because the wall could fall, you can demolish it and rebuild it. Indirect possibility that the wall has been weakened and somebody might break into your courtyard and rob you. That's a more attenuated risk. According to this opinion, you can't do that on the intermediate days. And some say that this Baraisa was cited not to support Rav Chisda's opinion, but in order to refute it, as follows. Come in here that which is taught in a Baraisa with regard to a wall that is leaning toward the public domain and is likely to fall. One may demolish and rebuild it in his usual manner due to the danger it poses to the public. The Gemara explains, the Baraisa indicates that if the need to build the wall is due to the danger that it poses, yes, he is permitted to rebuild the wall. But if the reason is not due to the danger, no, he is not permitted to do so. Shall we say that this is a conclusive refutation of the opinion of Rav Chisda, who says that one may build the wall of his courtyard in his usual manner, even if no danger is present, right? Like he's protecting against theft. We consider that a danger, but it's not the same as, people could be crushed as they're walking by. And the Gemara answers, well, Rav Chisda could have said to you, there, in the case where the existing wall poses a danger, he is even permitted to demolish the wall and build it from scratch. Here, in the case of the ordinary wall enclosing a courtyard, he is permitted to build the breached wall in the usual manner, but not to demolish it. So again, we see the sages over and over and over again finding this kind of intermediate middle path for Chol HaMoed, the intermediate days, where it's not go for it, do any kind of labor like on a weekday, but you can't do any kind of labor like Shabbos or a festival. It has to fit in with the sanctity of the day and the not quite sanctity of the intermediate days. All right. And the Gemara asks there too, in the case of the leaning wall, let us say that he is permitted to demolish it and thereby remove the danger, but not to rebuild it until after the festival, right? If it's really about the danger, well, as soon as he demolishes the wall, there's no more danger. His courtyard might be exposed to the public, but there's no danger that his leaning wall is going to hurt somebody who happens to be walking by. And the Gemara answers, well, if so, he might refrain even from demolishing it, as demolishing the wall would leave his courtyard unprotected. Therefore, to eliminate the danger posed by the leaning wall, he is permitted not only to demolish it, but to rebuild it as well, so that we avoid the unintended consequence that since he doesn't want his courtyard opened up, he's not going to, be particularly cognizant of whether the public is in danger because he doesn't want to demolish for their sake and leave himself unprotected if he's not able to both demolish and build. And so the sages said, yes, you can demolish to avoid the danger to the public and rebuild to protect your courtyard. And the Gemara clarifies, and Rav Ashi said, and the wording of the Mishnah is also precise and indicates that it is referring to the wall of a garden, as understood by Rav Chisda, as it teaches during the sabbatical year. One may even build in his usual manner. And the Gemara clarifies, where is the wall to which the Mishnah is referring? What is the case that we're talking about? If we say that the Mishnah is referring to a wall of a courtyard, need it be said that it may be built during the sabbatical year? Only agricultural labors are prohibited during the sabbatical year, but construction is permitted. Rather, is it not referring to the wall of a garden? And so where agriculture is going on at a garden, a vegetable garden. And it was necessary to state that this wall may be built during the sabbatical year to indicate that even though he appears as one who is building a protection for his produce, he is nevertheless permitted to do so. And this proves that the Mishnah's discussion pertains to building the wall of a garden. And the Gemara concludes, learn from this that Rav Chisda's interpretation is indeed the correct understanding of our Mishnah. That concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 3. New Mishnah. Totally different kind of behavior that we're going to address, whether this activity is permitted on the intermediate days of the festival or not. Mishnah number 4. When symptoms of leprosy appear. Again, we're talking about tzara'as, right? Not leprosy the way we understand it, but the physical manifestation of a spiritual malady that no longer exists in the world, but did when the temple stood in Israel. And people, who committed certain kinds of transgressions, like using their tongue for evil speech, gossip, slander, etc., would eventually be struck with this manifestation on their skin. Not contagious, not a physically contagious condition, right? It happens to you because of your spiritual conduct that you end up having this skin outbreak, all right? When symptoms of tzara'as appear, they must be examined by a Kohen, by a priest, one who is qualified to look at the spots on skin and distinguish them from pimples or from eczema, from blisters, from any kinds of stuff that we have on our skin. He's able to recognize, no, that's the particular condition known as tzara'as. So only a priest can make that determination by law. That's a Torah law. And obviously you need a priest who is well versed in the kinds of spotting that would make you a metzora. So Rabbi Meir says, a priest may initially examine an individual showing symptoms of tzara'as on the intermediate days of a festival in order to be lenient, i.e., he may pronounce the individual to be free of tzara'as, but not in order to be stringent, i.e., he may not pronounce the individual to be tameh, ritually impure, and therefore disqualified from eating consecrated food, disqualified from entering the temple. And this is during the pilgrimage festival of Passover or Sukkot, so it would really be a bummer when you go up to Jerusalem and you want to bring offerings in the temple, and along the way, you start having these spots on your skin, and you're thinking, do I have tzara'as? Because if I do, I can't enter the temple. You can't give other people tzara'as, but you are in a state of impurity, and if you touch them, they will become ritually impure and have to go through a purification process. Quicker than you, though. They just touched you and became tameh. They can immerse in a mikvah, wait for nightfall, and they're good to go. You have to wait until your skin clears and the priest declares you, post tzara'as. But when the thing first comes out, there's a whole process because it might not be clear. Very often, there's the spots. Maybe it's tzara'as, maybe it's not. So the priest will say to this person, you're quarantined. Don't touch anyone because you might have tzara'as. And I'm going to come back in a week, and then I'll tell you, is it really tzara'as or not? A week later, I might say, you know what? It didn't advance. It didn't progress. You don't have tzara'as. You're good to go. Or, yes, you do have tzara'as, and now you have to wait another week before your isolation is going to end. So there's two examinations. The initial one, which might lead to a case of doubt and a revisit a week later. And that second visit, when the priest is going to come and say, okay, no, it's not, or yes, it is. So Rabbi Meir says a priest may not initially examine. That first examination during the festival, a priest may initially examine an individual showing these symptoms on the intermediate days of the festival in order to be lenient and say to him, no, that's nothing at all, you're good to go. But he's not going to look at it and say, no, that's a doubtful case, so you need to quarantine and not join in the festivities. Now, what does it mean? He can examine it to be lenient, but he cannot examine it to be stringent. Once he examines, he has to give a truthful answer, right? So what's going on here? So the individual does not become ritually impure until the priest pronounces him to have leprosy, and therefore the priest may remain silent and thereby prevent causing the afflicted individual distress during the festival. So it seems that the priest has a choice. If it's one of these doubtful cases, he could come, he could look at it and just say nothing at all and walk away. Or he could come and say, no, yeah, you have it, so you have to isolate. And the rabbis say the priest may not examine the symptoms in order to be lenient or to be stringent. So the rabbis say don't examine these spots during the festival. Wait till after the festival. That's the Mishna. Gemara. It is taught in a Baraisa. Rabbi Meir says a priest may examine an individual showing symptoms of tzara'as on the intermediate days of a festival in order to be lenient, but not in order to be stringent. Rabbi Yosei says the priest may not examine the symptoms to be lenient or stringent. He may not examine at all. That was the opinion of the rabbis in the Mishnah. The reasoning behind Rabbi Yosei's opinion is that if you attend to the individual with the symptoms of tzara'as, in order to be lenient, well, then you must attend to him even to be stringent. If the priest sees that the symptom is in fact leprosy, he must declare the affected person tameh, ritually impure, rather than remain silent. Consequently, in order to avoid declaring that he has leprosy, that he has tzara'as on the festival, the priest should not examine him at all. Don't ask, don't tell, don't know, I can go forward to the temple, right? Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said, the statement of Rabbi Meir appears to be correct with regard to the case of a quarantined leper. This is now the second visit. A guy who a week ago they said, well, you might have tzaras. So he's been isolated for a week, and now the priest comes to make the second visit. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says, well, Rabbi Meir's opinion about the guy can come in order to be lenient, but not in order to be stringent, is actually talking about the second visit. The statement of Rabbi Meir appears to be correct with regard to the case of a quarantined leper. In this case, the priest may re-examine him, right? Make the second examination at the end of a week, even on the intermediate days of the festival, because if he declares the individual to be tahor, ritually pure, so he will cause the individual to rejoice, and then he can rejoin the festivities. And if he declares that the individual must be quarantined for another week, well, then his situation is no worse than it was previously. On the other hand, the statement of Rabbi Yosei appears to be correct with regard to the case of the confirmed leper. This is the one maybe on a third visit, right? He was told either the first time we're going to check you out in a week, and then he comes back a week later and says, yes, that is tzaras, so you're a confirmed metzora. Or maybe even on the first visit, the priest said, no, you got it. You're a confirmed metzora. Then 1 week after confirming it, he's coming back to say, did the condition clear up? So in this case, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is saying that the statement of Rabbi Yossi appears to be correct with regard to the case of the confirmed leper, who has already been declared conclusively impure by a priest. And the Gemara on 7b, we're going to get to tonight, will explain the reason for this statement. So Rava said, with regard to an individual with symptoms of tzaras who is still ritually pure, i.e., who has not yet been examined by a priest, right? He might have a symptom, he might not, but if a priest hasn't looked at it, he's still tahor. You can't declare yourself tameh. Even if you're an expert in this stuff and you're like, oh, I have it. Oh man, I got it. No, only the priest can come and say to you, yes, you have it, and then you become tameh. Even if it's clear as day to you that you have tzaras, until the priest says you have it, you don't have it. Very interesting. That's how you could see that this is a physical expression of a spiritual malady. And again, this doesn't exist anymore in the world. It only existed when the Jewish population, was living at a very spiritually exalted level when the temple was standing in our midst in ancient Israel. Okay, where am I? Okay, so Rava said, so with regard to the individual with symptoms of leprosy who is still ritually pure, i.e. who has not yet been examined by the priest, everyone agrees that the priest does not examine him, as his status can only worsen due to the examination. Better to wait until after the pilgrimage festival is over and then get examined and then go through the process. So with regard to it, and again, because you could do this because it's not like you're going to make other people sick. There's a problem that you might make them retroactively tameh when you get declared tameh, but that wouldn't even happen because you don't become tameh until the priest comes and says you're tameh. Before that, you're not tameh, right? So it's not like the COVID where there's a risk and contact tracing and you might cause people to die. It's not like that at all. And that's why they might say, don't ask, don't tell. We'll wait until after the festival is over to do this examination. That's why we're discussing this in Tractate Moed Katan. So with regard to a suspected metzora who is in his first week of quarantine, everyone agrees that the priest does come and examine him at the end of that week, even if it's on the intermediate days, because the priest might say to him, your condition cleared up. You are not a metzora. You're good to go. Now he can rejoin the festivities. His situation improves. Or he says, no, you have it. You are a confirmed metzora. Well, he was already quarantined and isolated, so his situation is not any worse. So the priest should come for the one who's finished a week of isolation because he was quarantined because of possible tsaras. Where the sages disagree, it is with regard to a suspected leper who is already in his second week of quarantine. So one sage, Rabbi Meir, holds that the matter depends upon the discretion of the priest. If he is found ritually pure, the priest declares him pure, and so he's in a much better situation. If he is found ritually impure, the tsaras hasn't cleared up, he still has it, he is impure, then the priest can remain silent. And then as long as the priest does not declare the affected individual ritually impure, he does not become impure. Okay, so I guess he was quarantined twice, but for possible tsaras. It was never confirmed. So that's why now the priest could come for this third visit and say, you know what, nothing. He says nothing, then the guy doesn't become tameh, even if he has it, because the priest said nothing. And if the priest looks at it and says, you're clear, then his situation totally improves. He's done with the quarantine. And the other sage, Rabbi Yosei, holds that since it is written, this is the law of the plague of leprosy, to pronounce it pure, or the plague of tzaraas, to pronounce it pure or to pronounce it impure. That's the verse in Leviticus 13:59. So according to Rabbi Yosei, the priest doesn't have that discretion to not say anything, to remain silent. If he's brought in, he must speak. Yes, it's tsaras. No, it is doubtful, I'm not sure, or no, it's not tsaras at all. Either one of those three outcomes, the priest needs to say it. We're on the B side of 7. The Gemara proceeds to analyze the Baraisa. The master said that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi said the statement of Rabbi Yosei appears correct with regard to the confirmed metzora. And the statement of Rabbi Meir appears correct with regard to a quarantine, right? One who's, they have a doubt, they've quarantined him, but they're not sure if he's a metzora or not. And the Gemara raises an objection, but isn't the opposite taught in a different Baraisa, namely that Rabbi Yosei's statement appears correct with regard to the quarantined metzora, while Rabbi Meir's statement appears correct with regard to the case of the confirmed metzora. And the Gemara answers, right, where they seem to have swept their opinions. How is that possible? You know, the Baraisa contradicts the Mishna. So the Gemara answers, this is a dispute between Tanaim, the rabbis of the Mishnah, in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. One sage, the author of the later Baraisa, holds that the company of the world at large is preferable to the leper, to the metzora. Consequently, the priest may examine a confirmed metzora during the festival because the priest will either decide that the metzora's symptoms are still present, in which case the metzora's situation will be no worse than before he was examined, or the priest will declare that his symptoms have subsided, in which case the metzora may re-enter the community, which will bring him joy. And the other sage, the author of our Baraisa on page 7a, holds that the company of his wife is preferable to the metzora. What do you mean? Consequently, the priest may not examine the confirmed metzora on the festival because if he declares that his symptoms have subsided, the metzora will begin his 7-day purification process, right? Once he's through being a metzora, he still has a 7-day process to become purified again and qualified to enter the grounds of the temple. But during that 7-day purification process, he and his wife are prohibited to each other. They can't have conjugal relations. So maybe it's not good for him that during the intermediate days of the festival, when he wants to, be in a state of joy that week, and he and his wife would like to be together, maybe it's better that he doesn't get, because while he's a doubtful leper, one who's a metzora, one who's quarantined, but it's not confirmed, he and she are permitted to each other. But once the priest says, you're clear, you are not a metzora, now he begins the 7-day process, and during that 7-day process, he and his wife are prohibited to each other. Because the metzora will begin his 7-day purification process, during which time he is prohibited from engaging in conjugal relations with his wife. Due to the distress that this causes him, it is preferable that the priest not examine him at all during the festival. And the Gemara asks, is this to say that a confirmed metzora is permitted to engage in conjugal relations with his wife if he's a confirmed metzora. He can have conjugal relations, but if he's just got over being a metzora, he's prohibited from being with his wife. Is that true? And the Gemara answers, yes. And so too it is taught in a baraisa. With regard to a metzora who is counting his 7 days, it is written, but he shall remain outside his tent 7 days. Leviticus 14:8. Remember, this is the metzora, the guy that when he is a metzora, he's supposed to walk around with his garments torn and say to everybody he encounters, Tameh, Tameh, I'm impure, don't come into contact with me because you'll become Tameh. You won't become a metzora, but you'll become Tameh, disqualified from entering the temple or eating consecrated food. So he's got to keep a distance from people. Once he's through being a metzora, he's still got to get back to the world from that heavy tuma. And so during this 7-day purification process, one of the requirements is stay outside of his tent. How is that related to conjugal relations? It's directly related to that. Because when the Torah speaks of a man returning to his tent, it means returning to his wife so they can be together physically. How do we know that? The verse teaches that the metzora is prohibited from engaging in conjugal relations as the words his tent refer only to his wife. As it is stated, Deuteronomy 5:27, go say to them, return again to your tents. And Rabbi Yehuda says, the verse states, and after he is cleansed, they shall count for him 7 days, indicating that he is prohibited from having conjugal relations during the days of his counting, but not during the days of his confirmed tzara'as, right? And just mentioning again, where does it say, go again, return to your tents? The proof that return again to your tents refers to you may be physical with your wife. The proof is from the fact that prior to the giving of Torah at Mount Sinai, the people were told, prepare yourselves for the 3rd day, do not approach a woman, right? So just prior to the giving of Torah, for 3 days, the husbands and wives were prohibited to have sex. Exodus 19:15. After the Torah was given, the prohibition was lifted with the words, return again to your tents. So this is a euphemism in the Torah. When a man is said, don't go to your tent, stay away from your tent, the husband and wife are prohibited to each other. When it says return to your tents, they become permitted to each other again. Where am I? Yes. Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, says, since the verse indicates that the prohibition to engage in conjugal relations applies during those 7 days that he must count after he's over his symptoms of being a metzora and before he can again become tahor, ritually pure, it follows, based on an a fortiori inference, that the prohibition should also apply during the days of his confirmed leprosy, when his impurity is even more severe, right? This is a kal v'chomer. If during the days that he's counting, after he's done being a metzora, and he's just counting 7 days until he becomes pure again, and during those 7 days, he and his wife are prohibited to each other, all the more while he actually is in the state of tzara'as, when he is a confirmed metzora, they should be prohibited to each other. Right? Wrong. And Rabbi Chia said, I deliberated this matter before Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi and said, have you not taught us, our teacher, that King Jotham was only born to Uzziah, the king of Judah, during the days of his confirmed tzara'as? And this would indicate that a confirmed metzora is permitted to engage in conjugal relations. In other words, this prince who became a king of Israel, his mother became pregnant when she slept with his father, who was a confirmed metzora at the time that they slept together, the king and queen. Okay? So this would indicate that a confirmed metzora is permitted to engage in conjugal relations. And Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi said to him, I too said this. I am also of the opinion that a confirmed metzora is permitted to engage in conjugal relations, in contrast to the opinion of Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Yehuda. And the Gemara asks, Well, with regard to what principle do they disagree? Right? Why would you be allowed or not allowed? So the Kal Vachomer argument that if during the days of counting pure days after you were already over the disease, you can't sleep with your wife, all the more while you have the disease, you shouldn't sleep with your wife. That's the Kal Vachomer. That's the argument in favor of that they should be prohibited to each other while he's a confirmed metzora. What is the counter balancing argument, right? What is the opposite argument? Let's see. And the Gemara asks, with regard to what principle do they disagree? And the Gemara explains that Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, holds the merciful one revealed the prohibition of conjugal relations with one's wife during the days of his counting, and all the more so the prohibition applies during the days of his confirmed metzora, tzaras, when his ritual impurity is even more severe. We just explained that. And the other sage, Rabbi Yehuda, maintains that which the verse revealed, it revealed. But that which it did not reveal, it did not reveal. All we know from the Torah is that during the 7 days that you're counting after you've been a metzora, after the symptoms have cleared up, then you and your wife are not permitted to each other. We can't necessarily assume from that all the more so they're prohibited to each other while the man is actually a confirmed metzora. The Torah doesn't say that, and we should not assume it. We should not read into the verse in that way, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Now, the Gemara, and that's where they leave it. That's where they leave that argument. So what is the law? The halacha of a metzora with regard to conjugal relations, a metzora is permitted to engage in conjugal relations in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, as Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi and Rabbi Chia agree with his opinion. And that's how you know for a fact that tzaras is not a disease like the way we think of diseases, that is contagious, that's airborne, virus, bacteria. It's none of that, right? This was only something that was visited upon a person because of their behavior. And while they might impart tuma, ritual impurity, they don't impart the tzaras to another person, even if the husband and wife sleep together when one of them is a confirmed metzora. And the Gemara returns to the original dispute with regard to the priest's examination of the symptoms of tzaras. Is this to say, right? The question was in our Mishna, should we bring the priest and examine you? If you think you've got tzaras, should we bring the priest and examine you on the intermediate days of the festival? Maybe it's better not to know, so you can rejoice in the festival, and then you can get examined after the festival is over. So is this to say that the matter depends upon the discretion of the priest, i.e., the priest can decide whether to declare the affected person ritually pure or impure, or whether to examine the symptoms at all? And the Gemara answers, yes. And so too it is taught in the Baraisa. The verse says, but on the day it appears in him, Leviticus 13:14, from which it may be inferred that there is a day when you examine the symptoms found in him, and there is a day when you do not examine those symptoms. So the priest can decide whether to examine or not, and the priest can decide, even if he sees the symptoms, whether to speak or not. And from here they stated, with regard to a bridegroom upon whom the symptoms of tzaras came into being, right? So this would suck, right? The bride and groom are about to get married, and he's got these possible symptoms of tzaras. Now, even if he's confirmed metzora, they can be together. But does he want to go through the wedding? I mean, what's going on with this? So from here they stated, with regard to a bridegroom upon whom the symptoms of tzaras came into being, we give him the 7 days of the wedding feast before the examination that determines ritual impurity or impurity. Maybe he and the bride would be allowed to each other, but they're not going to be allowed, to go to all the parties of that week and dance, etc. with all the other people. It's going to really stink. So we give him the 7 days and only bring the priest to examine his skin after the 7 days of the wedding feast. And this ruling applies whether the symptoms appeared upon him, upon his house, upon his clothing, right? We've talked at other times that tzaras can afflict a house. And there, it's not necessarily because of the behavior of the people in the house, not at all. In fact, it might be a blessing. The house might be condemned if the tzaras spreads a lot, but in tearing it down, sometimes they found treasure that the Canaanites who lived there before had stashed in the walls. There were examples of that. Okay, but at any rate, whether the symptoms are on him or his house or his clothing, they don't examine it until the wedding feast is over. And similarly, if the symptoms of tsaras appeared upon an individual during a pilgrimage festival, we give him the 7 days of the festival in order to avoid causing him distress during that time. And this is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says, the ruling is correct, but there is no need to prove it from this verse, as a much simpler proof can be brought from a different source. It says, Leviticus 14:36, then the priest shall command that they empty the house before the priest goes in to see the plague, so that all that is in the house be not made unclean. If a house has tsaras, all the stuff in it is also going to be ritually impure, and you might have to get rid of a lot of it. But before you bring the priest to look at the house, you could take all the furniture out of the house. And then, even though it was in the house before, until the priest says that house has tsaras, it doesn't. And therefore, the stuff that you took outside gets saved. And the Torah states it in that way. And this shows you that until the priest makes the determination, nothing has happened. And you can work with the law in order to avoid, to produce the least loss and inconvenience. And it's proven right there. So if we delay the priest's examination of the house in order to give the owner time to remove his utensils and prevent them from contracting ritual impurity, which is merely an optional matter, all the more so should we delay this examination for the matter of a mitzvah, in other words, so as not to detract from the bridegroom's joy of the wedding or from the pilgrim's joy of the festival. I'm almost done, so you got questions or comments, get them in. And the Gemara asks, what is the practical difference between them, whether the source of the halacha is one verse or another? And Abaye said there's no practical difference between the opinions. Rather, the interpretation of the meaning of the verses is the difference between them, as each has a different interpretation of the verse from which the other derived this law. And Rav has said there is in fact a practical difference between them with regard to whether or not one delays the examination of the symptoms found on a person's body for an optional matter, right? Do you delay it not because it is the pilgrimage festival and he wants to rejoice in the festival, or because he's getting married? He doesn't have that kind of thing coming up, but it's just an optional matter. It's inconvenient for him to become a metzora this week, so can we delay it in that situation? Rabbi Yehuda holds that one delays the examination only for the sake of a mitzvah, while Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi holds that one may delay it even for the sake of an optional matter. The Gemara asks, and according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, why is it not permitted to delay the priest's examination of leprous symptoms on an individual's body for an optional matter, just as with regard to the symptoms of one's house? The Gemara answers, we do not learn legal principles from there because the law of tsaras of houses is itself a novelty, a unique biblical law from which one cannot extrapolate cases having to do with people's bodies. And the Gemara explains that the law of the symptoms of tsaras of a house constitutes a novelty, as by Torah law, wood and stones are generally not susceptible to tuma, to ritual impurity, yet here in the case of a house with tsaras, they do become susceptible to ritual impurity. That makes it a unique situation, and we shouldn't learn out from the laws of the tsaras of a house, sort of actions and principles that we would take for the tsaras of a person. That completes page 7, and we'll pick it up tomorrow on page 8, God willing, Thursday. Okay, let's go to questions and comments. Interesting class, right? I mean, the policy issues that are at play, and the fact that the tuma doesn't exist until the priest identifies it as such, and why we might withhold him making that determination to preserve the joy of the festival, to preserve the joy of the wedding, and other situations. Okay, Yosef, I've noticed in the notes for my siddur, for my prayer book for Shacharis, the morning service, that it references tractate Peah, in which it speaks of reaping the corners. right? That it's one of the principles of taking care of the poor, the widow, the orphan, the disenfranchised, that when you harvest your field, you leave the corners of the field. You don't harvest that, and then they can come along and glean for themselves. It's a way of charity for the poor. Okay, so this got me looking into laws of Kilayim and Shemitah to understand better the background for all these Mishnas. Have we or will we go over some of these things more in our cycle? Oh, most definitely. Most definitely we will. We'll be talking about Peah and all kinds of principles and the laws of contracts and so much. The first tractate, Brachas, so that's its own thing. And that's the order of Zerayim, seeds. That's where you begin the Talmud. Then what we're in now is there's 6 orders of the Talmud, 6 sections of the Talmud. We're in section number 2, which has been all about festivals, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Passover, Purim, now the intermediate days of festivals. And once we complete that, then we're going to get into all different kinds of subjects, and we'll certainly be talking about tithing. We'll be talking about leaving the food in the corners, the grain in the corners, all kinds of stuff. Don't you worry, Sharon. Since lashon hara, gossip, evil tongue, still exists, why doesn't Sira'as? These tractates were still writing about it after the temple was destroyed, so that alone doesn't seem the only reason. Well, they're writing about it because we have to understand the principles, whether or not the temple is standing, right? We don't get to fulfill these mitzvahs because it doesn't exist anymore, but in studying them, that's the next closest thing, right? And it's a positive mitzvah. After you've been declared a metzora, then you have a positive obligation to go through that purification process. So that's a mitzvah that we can no longer fulfill. We're going to study it so we can do the next best thing. But to get to the heart of your question, gossip is still a problem. Why did Tzira'as go away? It seems like that would be a good way to sort of keep the people in line. Yes, but, they were living in a more miraculous way. Right? So during the first temple period, you would go to visit the temple, and there was a supernatural manifestation going on at all times. In fact, there were 10 ongoing miracles in the first temple. And one of them was like the air, like this energy shimmering over the altar where the offerings were given. That wasn't just smoke and heat rising. It was it was the Shekhinah. It was the physical manifestation that God caused so that you would go there and you'd be like, it's not just that I have to imagine that I'm in the presence of holiness. You experience holiness. You see it, feel it. I always say, if you go to a NASCAR race, it's unlike football. Football's super exciting. You really care emotionally what's going on the field. But if you go to a NASCAR race, when those cars go by, you feel it. Your body shakes with the sound and the vibration of it. When you went to the temple, you would experience that miracle. Second temple period, many of those miracles no longer present. Some, yes, right? Like the challahs were hot all week, that kind of thing. But so this idea where they were living in this more exalted state where miracles were more commonplace, and there were lots of prophets, not just the 55 prophets whose words are recorded in the Bible, but as we've read before, there were many prophets, people prophesying, you could see that they were having a prophetic experience. So the idea that if you behave badly spiritually, you'd have an outbreak on your skin, it might be unpleasant for that to happen to you, but think about the feedback of it. Right? That's a gift, a big gift from God, that when you stray spiritually, it's going to show up on your skin because that's going to help you stay in line. And you're going to be very thankful to God for giving you that, that rebuke. It didn't kill you. It didn't hurt you. It allowed you to go through a process, examine your deeds, come out the other side a finer, wholer, more spiritually elevated person. Tragically, the overall spiritual level of the people fell to the point where we didn't merit to have the temple in our midst, and we didn't merit to have Tzira'as in our midst. It was positive to have it in our midst. Now we don't have it. When the Messiah comes, when Mashiach comes, presumably we'll have it again. Emily, What if a priest had tsaras? Can a priest declare himself unpure, or does he need another priest to do it? Excellent question. I don't know the answer offhand. We are going to be doing a whole tractate on tsaras, and we will be discussing it then for sure. And Sharon, why is it okay for a metzora to cause his partner to become tameh? Tameh, but not a metzora, right? That's why they would have conjugal relations with each other. Now, that's a choice she makes, right? Or if she has a tsaras, that's a choice the husband makes. It's not that big a deal, right? Like if they're not priests themselves, so they can't eat teruma anyway. If they weren't going to the temple that day, it's not going to prevent them from doing anything, right? Like being tameh is not that big a deal. You'd rather be tahor, but okay, so you go immerse in a mikvah, wait till nightfall, and then you're tahor again. It's not that big a deal. The one who has tsaras, he has to go through a 7-day purification. The one who touches a metzora, it's a much easier purification, and that's a free choice that they can make. And Karen, somewhere there must be a dermatologist named Cohen. Of course, there must be. And what's funny is my dermatologist, Dr. Weiss, shared with me that he wasn't like very involved in Torah study, but one day he was like walking through a deli and there was like a Torah study group there, and somebody in the group recognized him and said, "Oh, Stephen, come join us. Join us. We're learning here." It's like, it's not really for me. And the guy says, "Well, you wouldn't believe. This is the first time I've seen you walk through here when we were learning, and you wouldn't believe what we're learning." "What are you learning?" "The laws of skin diseases." And so he sat down and started learning with them, and I think learned with them for a year. So just a funny coincidence. All right, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night, the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, for page 8, Tractate Moed Katan. Have a great night.